Fallout's universe is filled with horrors, monsters, and mutants, all thanks to the corporate landscape, where companies operate without care for human life. Ethics become suggestions in a shredder, and where morality can be found in either very few people or never had any at all. So today we are going to explore what happened to the most evil companies in Fallout, starting with one that created a new kind of horror even before the war. Westech, the company that turned progress into a crater. Westech wasn't just a defense contractor. Westech was the defense contractor, power armor, cutting-edge military research, partnerships with the government. The whole patriotism is a product deal. And the big one, the thing that makes Westech a permanent stain on Fallout history, was their relationship with the forced evolutionary virus. FEV isn't just a science experiment in Fallout. It's the reason super mutants exist in multiple regions. It's the reason humanity as a concept gets blurrier the deeper you go into the lore. Westech's research didn't just create monsters, it created a new category of problem that the Wasteland can't outlive. So let's ask ourselves, just what exactly happened to Westech after the bombs? They got what every evil megacorporation deserves. Their legacy became a dungeon. Not the medieval type, but rather the remnants of offices with hulking beasts inside. In New California, a former Westech research facility took a direct nuclear hit and became what Wastelanders now only refer to as the Glow, a literal crater of radioactive death that's visible at night. It might be poetic, it could even be symbolic, but it's definitely the universe making sure the punishment fits the crime. And that right there is the first insight into what happened. Westech didn't disappear. It fossilized into geography. Their building didn't become history. It became an environmental hazard. It became a place where, even decades after the Great War, people look at it and remember why radiation is so dangerous. And those who head inside are met with even better reasons why the old world is best left alone. Those who seek to conquer it are either paragons of virtue, or just as bad as the companies themselves were. Now let's jump to Fallout 76. Westech has a research center in Appalachia. You probably know the story. Scientists try to develop good things. Military and government types show up. Good things become very bad things. The research center ends up abandoned after the Great War. Employees try to contain their mess, dump a neutralizing agent, and bail. But the important part is what happens later. That facility is eventually rediscovered by Taggarty's Thunder, who break in, find the atrocities, and it helps convince them that Roger Maxon, founder of the Brotherhood of Steel, was right, pushing them toward forming the Appalachian Brotherhood of Steel. Let that sink in. Westech's horrors didn't just create mutants and death zones. They helped create two factions. Not intentionally, of course. Westech didn't sit there going, we should inspire a nightly techno-cult. But when your company is so evil that people turn it into a moral wake-up call, you've officially become a cautionary tale with a body count, and it keeps going. The facility is later poked at by Enclave scouts looking for ways to boost DEFCON status to nuke China even more, and even though the FEV was rendered inert, the leftover systems and data were still useful enough for more super mutant chaos. Not to mention that time that a former Westech scientist and his buddies tried to make an improved version of FEV, only to create a doomsday virus that had to be stopped. So, what happened to Westech? They became the kind of evil that survives the apocalypse. Not as a corporation, as an infection. Fitting, isn't it? And if you think that's the worst version of corporate legacy, don't worry. Because we're about to talk about a pharmaceutical company that basically speedran the path from executive to Raider King. Because you know what's scarier than a monster in a lab or bred in a test tube? A monster who used to have a corner office, who calls the shots. Arctos Pharma. When healthcare is just a costume for control. Arctos Pharma is one of those companies whose work sounds normal if you say it fast and don't think about it too hard. What do they work in? Biopharmaceutical research and development. You hear that and you might think of vaccines, medicine, maybe some ethically questionable trials, sure, but nothing compared to the war crime tier stuff of Vault-Tec, Westech, or MedTech, right? Wrong. Arctos was running projects like Project Beanstalk before the Great War, testing chemical compounds on crop yields using modified Mr. Handys called Pharmabots, spread across multiple crop fields. That's already creepy because many Fallout companies very rarely do anything that benefits humanity without also doing something that benefits shareholders more. But what makes Arctos disturbing isn't just what they tested, it's the vibe. They were also engineering dependence, food, growth, chemicals, automation. If you control crops, you control survival. And that goes hand in hand with another test they were performing with the United States Space Administration, Project Z, a serum tested in deep space connected to an AI on Earth, creating a link between a subject's brain and a big brother-like entity. That's what it's about, control, monitoring. And then you get the key detail that makes this whole thing feel like a horror movie with a corporate logo slapped on the title card. Project Beanstalk was initially successful, successful, but issues with staffing and a significant accident halted further research. Project Z took the lives of those simply meant to observe it and turned them into test subjects themselves. An accident? An experiment. In Fallout corporate language, accident usually means somebody got melted, mutated, or eaten by a thing that used to be a regular animal before the company got involved. And experiments range from something that could be seen as truly benevolent to something that would make even the worst of humanity lose their lunches. Now, here's the part where Arctos goes from bad company to Fallout corporate evil in a nutshell. David Thorpe. David Thorpe was an Arctos executive. The few snippets we get of his life before the war described him as using ruthless tactics to dominate the pharmaceutical market. Truly a cutthroat, which would make what would later happen to him both all the more fitting and all the more frightening. Just before the war, he takes a vacation, meeting up with other ruthless and rich business elites like him as he meets up with his mistress instead of having his wife along. Then the Great War happens, while they're out on the slopes. The war makes it so that their morals, their ethics, what little they ever had, no longer meant anything. They can do whatever they want. Their true monstrous selves are revealed. Thorpe becomes a prominent raider leader in Appalachia, along with his mistress turned new wife and partner, which is both horrifying and even weirdly logical, because Fallout loves showing you that the apocalypse didn't create monsters out of nowhere, it just removed the rules and let the existing monsters roam freely. David Thorpe didn't become evil because the world ended. He just stopped needing to adhere to HR or require a business card to introduce himself. Thorpe might perish later on, but the Raiders, the evil he created, would persist in the form of the Crater Raiders, who continue to harass the settlers and other innocents of Appalachia to this day. So what happened to Arctos Pharma? Their dream of controlling life through science didn't die, it scattered. Their labs became playgrounds for mutations and disasters. Their executives became raiders. Their so-called progress became just another wasteland problem you can trip over while scavenging. And all that's left is robots attempting to continue experiments useful to no one. And honestly, Arctos is a perfect example of a pattern that you can find not just in Fallout, but in real life. Corporations don't vanish. They shed their skin and come back as something worse. Okay, pharmaceutical experiments and raider executives are bad, but what if your company's business model was workforce disposable, cancer optional? Yeah, let's go underground. Atomic Mining Services, Radiation into Recursion. Atomic Mining Services, simply known as AMS, operated in Appalachia as a mining company tied into the whole industrial mess of pre-war resource obsession. Unlike a lot of traditional Fallout corporate evil, AMS is one of the most disturbingly realistic companies in Fallout, because its evil isn't cartoonish. It's not on par with the comical implication of, we worship a Lovecraftian god in the basement. It's worse. It's paperwork evil. Spreadsheets, dossiers, and intentional obfuscation. AMS was known to be particularly ruthless toward workers. They routinely handled radioactive materials, something even the most standard company knows how to handle safely. AMS didn't. And the company's response when their workers suffered? Wear protective gear all the time. It's kind of hard when you need to take it off to eat, drink, sleep, or do anything at all. But here's the part that makes my soul leave my body. Radaway, something Fallout establishes was rather common and affordable, was made intentionally not commonly available at AMS. Why? To increase profit margins. Who cares if you get a little sick from radiation? Certainly not the executives. And if you developed cancer from exposure, immediate termination. That's not sci-fi villainy. That's just late-stage capitalism with a Geiger counter. Imagine being told, congratulations, you have cancer. Please clock out, pack your things, and get out. That's not to mention how Ultrasight became AMS's golden goose, a nuclear power source that seemingly formed at random, capable of fueling nuclear reactors for centuries instead of decades, with far more power potential beyond that. All it cost was the homes, livelihoods, and everything else it took for the company to buy out your coal mining town, send some mercenaries in to force it from you if you don't agree, and then strip mine and destroy it until there's nothing left, all for maybe enough Ultrasight to fuel a single toaster. AMS also became infamous for automation, cutting workers and replacing them with Hornwright auto miners as fast as possible. Oh, and their means of mining? Dropping nuclear bombs into mine shafts. Really saves time on getting out coal and diamonds when you turn a 10-foot mine shaft into a 100-foot crater. So they're poisoning workers and replacing them. They're dropping bombs that they're sending said workers to dig out. It's like the company looked at the concept of loyalty and said, is that edible? That's not counting that once Ultrasight was revealed to be a dud, and human workers turned out to be worse than robot ones, AMS started selling off some of its facilities to a group we would later find out would be none other than the Enclave, allowing the Enclave to begin studying ultrasight themselves, even if they thankfully did not survive to harness its power longer than the short amount of time they had it. But what happened to AMS after the Great War? Here's the grim punchline. Mining doesn't stop being valuable just because civilization collapses. The war ends governments. It doesn't end greed. If anything, greed gets more honest. AMS's industrial footprint, its mines, its tech partnerships, and its corporate infrastructure, it all doesn't just magically evaporate. It became the skeleton of Appalachia's post-war resource conflicts. They were involved in developing auto miners, the creation of ultrasight, and participated in building Watoga, a haven for the rich and powerful while kicking out the poor, alongside Robco. Their legacy is baked into the region. Automated extraction, worker disposability, and a landscape shaped by industrial exploitation. Exploitation that is still used by wastelanders, for good and evil, even decades later. AMS is the kind of company that would see the apocalypse and go, okay, but how will this impact our quarterly profits? Now, if you hated AMS for treating humans like replaceable parts, wait until you see an energy company using a national park and a state park like private sandboxes, and turning a gas well into a covert murder platform. Bishi Company. We own your land now. Bishi Energy Company, Bishi Co., operated primarily in natural gas, a logical investment for a world running low on petroleum, and where nuclear power isn't good enough to sustain those who can't afford it yet. Still, natural gas kind of sounds boring, doesn't it? Well, that's until you realize where they were digging. In 2077, Bishi operated a research vessel called the USS Ozymandias and acquired rights in Point Lookout State Park to probe for natural gas resources. Point Lookout, the place that already feels cursed. Land development, creepy hillbillies, and the remains of Civil War corpses, who wouldn't want to visit? So they were basically doing resource extraction in a region that's practically begging the universe to punish anyone who messes with it. So what exact kind of natural gas formed at Point Lookout? Remember the Civil War? Bishop got it in their heads that the thousands of bodies that are under the earth would make a brilliant source of natural gas. As it turned out, the amount of gas, while there did turn out to be some inside, wasn't even enough to create more than 12.5 canisters. Oh, and they intentionally sent a geologist who they knew would be opposed to how they extracted it, with orders to kill her if she found out, and find out she did. But Bish doesn't stop at, we're going to drill here, and kill anyone who dared to question it. They also commissioned the creation of a powerful assaultron unit, the imposter Sheep's Squatch. For what exactly? Oh, nothing. Just to bring down the prices of homes so they can buy up land rights and claim a monopoly. So, yeah, an energy company works with another morally bankrupt company that also designs nightmare robots. Totally normal, nothing suspicious. And in Skyline Valley, formerly Shenandoah National Park, there's a Bish-owned site called the Big Meadows Gas Well, Site 17. The background there is genuinely insane. The place had casualties, workplace deaths, and the usual pre-war corporate incompetence. The worst part is that in the end, it turned out the well didn't have nearly enough gas under it to justify the massive costs it took to build it. But then there's a worker named Harold Osborne who's acting suspicious, going up to the top of the extractor tower at weird times. Management starts flagging him like he's a communist sympathizer, because, of course, that's where their brain goes first. Except he isn't. He's a hitman. Osborne is an undercover operative directed by a high-level federal executive, and he sets up a sniper's nest at the top of the gas well tower to assassinate a target named Zeus, shooting into a convoy near Rapidan Camp, the White House of Appalachia. And the reason this is so Fallout-coded is that the scene is still there, untouched, implying it happened close to the Great War and nobody ever handled it. Awfully convenient, isn't it? Almost like someone knew that the war would happen, or perhaps it was a genuine coincidence. Now on to what happened. What became of Bishi after the war? Their corporate structure died, sure, but their projects, their sites, their machinery, their crimes, those stayed. You can even use their grotesque drilling and digging results as both a weapon and as resources to create your own tools of mass destruction. Bishi didn't leave behind a legacy of energy. They left behind a landscape filled with extraction scars and government corporate violence that never got buried. Alright, we've done military bioweapons, pharma experiments, radiation labor abuse, and corporate assassination. You might think we've hit peak evil. But what if the next company's horror was space exploration? After all, in space, no one can hear you scream. Repcon Aerospace, turning space into a sales pitch. Repcon is one of those brands in Fallout that gets remembered for vibes, rockets, space tourism energy. Blast off to the future, that kind of thing. But the deeper you go, the more you realize Repcon is basically the perfect example of how the pre-war world industrialized hope and then sold it back to you in pieces. Repcon was an up-and-coming regional aerospace firm and a contributor to Las Vegas political campaigns. They operated a test facility in the Black Mountains, with rocket launches that often went very wrong. so much so that locals complained about Repcon bombs landing in fields and destroying property, which is such a fallout line. Because imagine living in a small desert town and being like, yeah, sorry I'm late. The aerospace company accidentally dropped hope on my corn again. It was founded in a time when the resource wars had just begun and people needed something to believe in. Cut to 2 decades later, and all that could be found was failed launches and overly legal corporate jargon. Husks of rockets lay rusting under the gas station at Novak, while the test site and museum lay rusting and falling apart, showing how well that promise of blasting off to the future really turned out for the people of the old world. But right before the Great War, Repcon was purchased by Robco Industries in a hostile takeover, probably due to the destruction of their own launch facility, their careless handling of plasma and nuclear material, and their failure to make space mining a reality. After the takeover, new security countermeasures were installed and more militaristic plans were undertaken, especially after the discovery of a special radioactive igniting agent that interested certain senior Robco members. That's the moment Repcon stops being a space dream company and becomes yet another funnel for militarized tech, which is the most Fallout thing ever. Even space gets eaten by defense profits. Of course, it was only because they turned Repcon from a space exploration company into a weapon development company, developing the Q-35 matter modulator based off of stolen Poseidon energy schematics in a bid to improve on the ancient P-94 Plasmacaster. And given that design happens to show up in mass production in Fallout 3 and New Vegas, it's safe to say they succeeded. In the post-war era, Repcon's tech becomes a shrine, a trap, and a punchline. Because what happens after the war isn't that Repcon disappears. It's that Repcon's facilities become weird museums of what people wanted the future to be. Kind of like Fallout as a whole. You get the Bright Brotherhood occupying the Repcon test site, ghouls clinging to the dream of leaving Earth and finding somewhere better. That's tragic, because Repcon's dream was always a corporate dream first. The future they promised was never meant for everyone, or how the Brotherhood of Steel were sent there to recover technology, only to die a pointless death at the hands of a 200-year-old building simply being old and having random collapses. In addition, Repcon's brand legacy includes genuinely absurd details like tour souvenirs, glow-filled rocket replicas, except kids drank the liquid because they thought it was Nuka-Cola, simply because it glowed. The incidents gained notoriety to the point that newspapers called it the Repcon Shakes, and all of the remaining souvenirs were thrown out into a random nearby motel to sell alongside its little dinosaur toys. If that doesn't summarize pre-war consumer culture, I don't know what does. So what happened to Repcon? They got swallowed by Robco before the bombs even fell. Then their facilities became dangerous monuments, still locked down, still crawling with security, still holding radioactive secrets, and still attracting people who think the future is hidden inside. That's the industrial side of the future that never was. But what if the next company proves the wasteland's moral rot didn't come from science labs or mines, but instead it came from entertainment? Yeah, let's talk about the company that sold heroism and propaganda in comic book form while the world burned. Hubris Comics, when propaganda wears a cape. Hubris Comics was a pre-war entertainment company founded in 2021, headquartered in Washington, D.C., and tied into a whole web of publishing divisions and spin-offs. You've likely heard or seen some of their properties. On paper, it's just comics. In practice, it's something darker. A factory that mass-produced comfort and propaganda in a collapsing society. Hubris made properties like Grognak the Barbarian, The Silver Shroud, Captain Cosmos, classic Fallout pulp icons. But in Fallout, even something as basic as entertainment isn't neutral. While the Mistress of Mystery gets a big-budget Hollywood actress to play her on TV, or the newest radio show The Silver Shroud has him fighting the Mechanist, people are starving in cities, fighting each other for scraps, or dying without getting to say goodbye to their families in a war thousands of miles away. So when the world is collapsing, entertainment becomes control. Hubris wasn't just selling stories. They were selling escapism at industrial scale. And not in the cute way like, hey, reading is fun. More in the, please don't look at the resource wars, look at the masked vigilante instead way. Captain Cosmos promoted truth, justice, and the Space American way. Grognak saluted to the troops, and their villains were over-the-top parodies of communism or otherwise anti-American thought, such as Dr. Brainwash and his robot decapitalists. But in the post-war era, hubris, much like its name implies, doesn't die. It haunts. Hubris is one of the clearest examples of a company surviving without surviving. Their buildings are ruins, sure, but their stories, their characters, their symbols, those get absorbed into the wasteland's identity. The Silver Shroud becomes an actual persona that people adopt out of nostalgia and a desire for less complexity. Grognak becomes a legend scavengers still chase through merchandise and relics for. Hubris's content becomes cultural scrap metal. Even out in the wasteland, you still find long-forgotten comics describing tales of good winning out over evil. People make pop culture references, likening situations in the wasteland or more wild wasteland scenarios to something they've seen, heard, or read about in a comic book. Some wasteland Wastelanders even get into arguments on what superhero would beat another superhero. Or simply treating fictional stories not as fiction, but as reality. Even you gain buffs when you find these magazines either as temporary help or as permanent adjustments to your skills and abilities. Contrary to their characters, their stories forever locked at their last issue or their last episode, Hubris basically achieved immortality. Not as a company, as a myth-making machine that keeps influencing people long after the artists, writers, and executives are dust. There's a specific kind of Fallout humor here. Hubris made stories about heroes saving the day from communism, and then the day ended anyway. Maybe because of capitalism, maybe because of communism. It really doesn't matter at the end of the day. Hubris won out over both. Poisoning minds with stories, that's one thing. But what if the next company did something even more disgusting? What if they took childhood comfort and quietly turned it into a weapons contract? Wilson Atomatoys, turning childhood into landmines. Wilson Atomatoys is one of the most sinister companies in Fallout because their branding is pure innocence. Toys, collectibles, cute mascots. The most well-known of which is the Giddy-Up Buttercup. If you've played Mothership Zeta or Fallout 4, you already know that Horse is cursed. And we're not talking about the horsepower armor. That's not counting that, according to a Capital Post article in the Fallout TV show, the company was being sued over it. But it gets worse when you look at what the company was doing right before the bombs. Until October 21st of 2077, Wilson Atomatoys had an internal conflict. Its co-founder, Arlen Glass, was trying to convince leadership not to go down a certain path. Arlen was getting blocked by security, trying to save his company and himself, but was limited to basically watching the company slip into something darker. You already know what happens 2 days later. The war hits, and the company collapses. But what's important is what happened right before that collapse. The Psi-The program, the Wilson Atomatoys factory was being secretly converted into a production line for mines to aid the war effort after the company president made a deal with the Department of the Army as part of the Scythe program. Turns out the same lines that make Giddy-Up Buttercups are also really good for making landmines. 3 of the 5 production lines had already been converted 2 days before the Great War, with full-scale mine production scheduled for November 1st, 2077. So Wilson Atomatoys was literally in the process of transforming a toy factory into a landmine factory. That is evil in the most nauseating way possible. It's not even the mines alone. It's the betrayal of purpose. It's taking the machinery of childhood and repurposing it for mutilation. Why, exactly? Because profits had taken a slight dip, allegedly at least, but it was enough to make the other co-founder's son and current CEO, Mark Wilson, heavily reconsider. It's like some people in the pre-war world looked at children and said that it wasn't enough to bring joy to kids. No, they have to make bombs for the army as well. Arlen was left to die, while Mark was simply given a simple warning to get to shelter. Arlen survived, Mark did not. Since the war, Brian Nelson, the factory had been taken over by super mutants, and Wilson's corporate HQ becomes a super mutant base as well, as it had been left abandoned for years before mutants stormed it and used it for raiding. So, what happened to Wilson Atomatoys? They died with the old world, but the physical remnants became fortresses for monsters, which is, again, painfully on the mark. Get it? A company that helped build tools for war ends up becoming a shelter for things that shouldn't exist. At the very least, you can help a ghoulified Arlen find some hope and joy in the world. Okay, that one was bleak. So let's pivot to something lighter, right? A drink company, a soft drink brand. Surely that's harmless. No, it's Fallout. Let's talk about Sunset Sarsaparilla, the company that accidentally created many deadly wasteland treasure hunts out of marketing. Sunset Sarsaparilla, the legend that outlived its makers. The Sunset Sarsaparilla Company was a pre-war soft drink manufacturer, headquartered in Las Vegas, and famous especially in the American Southwest for its pride and joy, Sunset Sarsaparilla. Now, the company itself is already interesting because it's not evil in the same way as West Tech or AMS. Sunset is subtler. Their evil is unintentional, the kind that creeps in through consumer culture, through manipulation, branding, and the way a corporation can shape behavior without a gun. That is, until a gun is used to get something the corporation promoted. The Legend of the Star. Before the war, there was a promotional story about Sunset bottle caps marked with a star. Collect them, bring them to headquarters, and you get a prize. Nobody knows how it started, but it was more than enough to make the company shift into cowboy and Wild West marketing. They purchased robots from Robco, automated deliveries, and put production on double time. Then the Great War happened, and the story was warped into a legend. The robot mascot Festus kept it alive, and after the war, the simple prize became a bloated tale of technology caches and incredible loot. Malcolm Holmes follows you on the very first time you pick one up to not just reminisce, but warn you, and you see at least 2 instances of this madness, once with the friendly but naive Thomas and the fiercely competitive Jacqueline, and again with the man who won the contest at the cost of his life, Alan Marks. So what happened? A corporation created a gimmick. The apocalypse turned it into folklore, and now you've got Wastelanders obsessively chasing Starcaps like it's a holy quest. Which is funny, but also disturbing, because it shows you something Fallout loves to underline. People don't stop being human after the end. They still chase hope. They still chase stories. They still chase rewards. And corporations train them to do it. Post-war, the company dies, but the product lives. Supplies of Sunset Sarsaparilla remain in the Mojave, delivered to vending machines by robots, and even outside of Vegas, as seen in Season 2 of the TV show. And the drink stays popular long after the company itself ceases to exist. It's drunk in California, Nevada, and even as far as Appalachia. But the brand survives, because the wasteland still runs on scarcity, nostalgia, and myth. And maybe that's the creepiest kind of corporate immortality, when your product outlives your civilization. But hey, at least you get the taste of sarsaparilla to wash out all of those awful moral and ethical violations. So what really happened to all these companies? Well, here's the through line nobody likes admitting. Most of these companies didn't get punished. They didn't get defeated. They didn't get dragged into court or dismantled by some heroic movement. The world ended, and they simply stopped filing taxes. So if you ever wonder why Fallout feels so bleak, it's because the horror isn't just radiation or raiders. It's that the apocalypse didn't erase the old world. It just made the old world honest by bringing their atrocities to light, or at least leaving the door open for explorers to discover decades or centuries later. And yet, for the most evil companies in Fallout, they didn't need to survive. Their choices did. That's it. But what they left behind, the labs, mines, facilities, robots, chemicals, propaganda, everything, it didn't vanish. It became the Wasteland's inheritance. If you want to see what happened to every protagonist in Fallout, click the video on the screen.